A recent filing by the Internal Revenue Service in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Texas suggests the agency may be interpreting the Johnson Amendment in such a way to allow churches and religious organizations to engage in partisan activity. The Johnson Amendment is a 1954 provision in the U.S. tax code that prohibits 501c3 tax-exempt organizations, including religious bodies, from endorsing political candidates or parties. At this time, it remains unclear how this reinterpretation will affect enforcement beyond the specific lawsuit. That said, I know this shift makes life more difficult for rostered ministers and congregations, and it is troubling to this church, to say the least, because it confuses God's two reigns or two fundamental ways of working in society. Scriptures in our confessions teach that God works in one way through the proclamation of the gospel, but in a different way for civic life to establish good social order and justice. The Johnson Amendment, since 1954, has restricted direct and partisan campaign activity. Yet it is balanced in allowing for the expression of our baptismal calling to care for others and the world God has made through active civic engagement by its members and congregations. Under the current interpretation of the Johnson Amendment, churches can host candidate forums, conduct voter registration drives, advocate on issues, and even support passage of certain policies within limits. The proposed ELCA social statement, Faith and Civic Life Seeking the Well-Being of All, reaffirms this long-term ELCA understanding, stating that this church recognizes the legal soundness of the Johnson Amendment in prohibiting religious bodies or their representatives from verbally or financially supporting candidates or parties. Safeguarding the Johnson Amendment for our church is theologically rooted and not just a matter of supporting the good convictions of the First Amendment. Theologically, it keeps partisanship out of religious organizations, and for our church protects the proclamation of the gospel and the right administration of the sacraments as the unique purpose and calling of God's church and our congregations. At the same time, it allows appropriate avenues for advocating for God's justice and concern for good social order. The ELCA will continue to uphold and promote the amendment's restrictions on partisan campaign activity and support others who share concerns about the IRS recent filing. We will closely monitor any changes in IRS guidance and assess their implications for the ELCA and other religious organizations. A link to the ELCA's longer statement on this issue will be shared at the end of this video. For the time being, the ELCA joins other faith communities in urging political leaders to preserve the Johnson Amendment's protections. Weakening these rules is theologically disturbing and could open the door to political pressure on churches, legitimize partisan conflict in congregational life, and erode the proper institutional separations of church and state, ultimately threatening religious freedom. As a church in deep discernment about faith and civic life, we pray for God's guidance. Be well, dear church.